My name's Paul Connell from ODI LEEDS. Hopefully, if you found the tea and coffee, just help yourself to that during the afternoon. The toilets are just outside the lift. There's no planned fires or fire alarms, so we should be okay. But if we do need to leave the building, if there's a fire in here, we'll go out that door. If there isn't a fire in here and we can't smell any smoke, we'll go to the far end and go down the fire escape. And if you know Leeds, we'll just meet outside of the GRA, the BBC, just outside there. The team in pink will help you out with that. If you need, one in white, and obviously ODI HQ over here. But that's the ODI Leeds team here. If you've got any questions, ask them today. And if anybody doesn't like being on the web or photographed, please let us know, and we will try our very best to make sure that we respect your privacy in that regard. So, my name's Paul, ODI LEEDS. Almost exactly to the day, we are 6 years old. The idea was conceived in November 2013, and we launched here, took hold of the space with the pigeons and the remnants of a rave and a bar made out of bits of old timber and pallets. And this is the space that you've got now. So a purpose-built innovation space that over the 6 years we've developed into a space that people can collaborate around data. And I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction, and then we've got some great talks. We've got beer and nibbles, and hopefully you can all make some new friends, and then go away and do something amazing tomorrow. So, okay, what are we doing here? That's me. Alex Craven is over here. James Madison's over there. Eric is here. Jay is there. Fab. So we've got all our speakers. Alex Data City is a spin out of ODI LEEDS. He'll tell you all about that. James from ODI has got some fantastic new stuff that he wants to share, which is good. Eric's over here is going to tell us some cool stuff about data. And Jay from FutureGov has got a secret stuff. And what's really cool is that Data City is a spin out of ODI LEEDS. The ODI, obviously, we've got a great relationship over the last 6-7 years. KPMG are sponsors of ODI LEEDS. FutureGov are sponsors of ODI LEEDS. So the power of the network is huge. We're live streaming today, so hopefully other people are listening in. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about ODI LEEDS and innovating with data. So every time we talk about open data, and someone says, show me the value, give me an ROI, what we're doing, and we say, stop talking about that. Think about your priorities and what you are going to do with data. And then if you are open with that data, if you're open in your approaches, if you use the web as it was intended, you will create massive surpluses around your activity, your work, and you will make friends you didn't know you had, you will create opportunities that weren't there before, and most importantly, your stuff, if you do it in an open way on the web, will be there for other people to find when they're ready. And that's a really important piece, because we talk about people reaching into our work, reaching into our projects when they're ready. Some stuff that we did right at the start 5 or 6 years ago is starting to come back, and people are asking questions about it. The only way they can find out about that is because it's really easy to find on the web. It's published, and we've talked about it. If it was in a server, on an email, or somewhere, it's just impossible to find. So that's what we talk about when we're being open with our data, that it's, if you are radically open and you take that on board, you can create huge opportunities and surpluses around your activity and data. ODI LEEDS, 20 sponsors, absolutely amazing. Every time we say it, it's like, wow. Across the public and private sector, some regional, some national, some are very commercially focused, some are not. It's a real tribute to the people who are working in data in Leeds and this part of the world, that they have helped us be who we are. And without them, we would not be in the position we're at. So thanks very much. I'm going to ask you all to give that a round of applause, because on the web that'll look amazing. So 20 sponsors. So some of the things we talk about, value, surplus, data does equal power. So how do we respect those power balances, and how do we make sure that they are balanced, and how do we do that? Loads of great stuff around ethics and trust, and also think about data as infrastructure rather than data as a tool to answer a question. It needs investment, and it also needs care and stewardship around the same things you would do around a road or a pipe or some hard infrastructure. You need to treat the data as infrastructure, and as more people rely on services that use data, making sure that that data is still going to be in the usable form that it is now in 5, 10, 15, 20 years' time is really, really important. And it doesn't mean that we can monetize every single part of that process. It's doing that in the most efficient way that benefits the most people. With all of that stuff in 1 and 2, and I'll be really quick, we are very passionate about the fact that we're going to need new institutions to manage that, new institutional thinking. The old world of pay someone, write a report, create the thing, fund it, has gone to a large extent. People still want to hang on to that world of certainty, but the way in which we have distributed power networks, distributed energy networks, distributed data, distributed decision making, it requires people to think about things differently. Also, the way the world works, if you want to move at pace, you need different ways of making decisions, and also different ways of procuring things, of buying things that you can do. And if anyone's been involved in framework agreements or contracts that are maybe 7 years long, the things you do to bid, or you talk about when you bid for that project, definitely will be different to the things you'll be doing at the end of the project. So that whole different way of accepting change and doing that with data and technology does require different institutional thinking. I could talk all day about that, but I'm not going to. So what does it mean? We have 4 things. Radically open is the way that ODI LEEDS works. We try not to write reports. It's all on our website. If we do a project, it's on a blog. If we do a project, we have a web page, and you, as an output working with us, will get one web link with all of the assets, everything on one place. We try not to write a report and send you an email in a PDF. So the data, the photos, the people, all of that thinking that goes around that is in one place on the web, and it's searchable and findable and machine readable. We are very passionate about transport. If anyone lives in Leeds, you have a love-hate relationship with the transport system in this part of the world. So we have our open transport work. Our Open GovTech launched last year, which is about how we can help governments transition to that new institutional thinking of using data, using technology, using the web to do what they need to do. And then in January we launched Open Data Saves Lives. Over the last 2 years we've had NHS Digital and NHSX start to embrace what we're doing here at ODI LEEDS and ODI HQ. Open Data Saves Lives is our way of allowing people to access our work from those organisations, but also let them speak to the other 20 or 18 sponsors we've got here without feeling as if it's a different world. So Open Data Saves Lives is our health and social care work, but why can't they learn from what Northern Power Grid are doing in the way that they're managing their data infrastructure? Why can't they learn from Yorkshire Water? Why can't they learn from KPMG in an open way? And who can argue with Open Data Saves Lives? There's no way that you should be saying, why shouldn't we be involved in that one, then why should? You can find out all about that on our website. So whenever we say ODI LEEDS, if you want to find out about it, it's searchable on our website, and we build it all ourselves. And one of my passions this year is to try and explain to people to try and use the web as it was intended. So if you end up in a meeting where someone says, oh yeah, what we need is we need a portal, we're going to buy a thing, use the web. It's very simple to put a website up and make it searchable and findable and shareable. It doesn't need to go through a comms and get permission and make sure the branding's right for teams to work on projects, for people who are passionate about things that need to change to be put onto the web and shared. We need to get, I think we need to get a little bit away from asking permission to do things on the web and start to do them ourselves. And so we use our own, take our own medicine. So if you look on our website, we have our annual report to our sponsors is one web link. It's automatically generated from the data we collect. Each of our sponsors gets a bespoke report. They get their value and their outputs that's generated from the data we collect here, and it's automatically done. For someone who's had to write those reports, it's amazing that we press a button and we get 20 reports that are all different and bespoke, but we're using the web as it was intended. Again, I could talk about this all day, and there is definitely a bit of a fight back about people wanting to put things inside their own little portal or control, and that way, you know, that limits innovation, it limits, when we talk about data and power, it limits the access that other people might want to that. So, the other important thing is that it has to be fun, ODI LEEDS is definitely an informal organisation, so we tend not to do things in the normal way. I'm normally in charge, but the team will tell me that they're really in charge of what happens. We are radically open, so our sponsors get to use the space whenever they want. It's definitely not a university or a corporate space or a local government space. It's been built for the people who are using it, and it's been built to do things. So if there's any questions about ODI LEEDS, we'll take them now. Otherwise, we'll get on to the talks. Any questions? Fab. Got away with that. So, over to Alex. Have we got a microphone for Alex, or is he going to use the... Oh, here we go. Look at this. As I told you, I'm not in charge. So I'll move that. So Data City is a spin-out of ODI LEEDS. I'll let Alex explain why it is a spin-out of ODI LEEDS, and we do have a live demo, so good luck.
Yeah. Hello. Right, hi, my name is Alex Craven. I'm co-founder of the Data City with Paul and Tom Forth, who some of you may know from his activity on Twitter. The reason I'm a founder of the Data City is when Paul started, I was running a different business, a company I founded when I was 23, and we'd started running data meetups in Leeds. Met Paul at one of those. He explained this concept before it existed. I thought it sounded like a good thing to do, so we joined as one of the founding sponsors. Not really knowing what was going to happen with that. The business I ran at the time was a marketing agency. We'd started looking at the applications of data in the marketing sector. We'd built a data science team, and we were looking for innovation and ideas to do stuff. So when Paul said he was going to build an organisation that was focused on innovation with data, that sounded like a good place to be involved. So today I'm going to talk about creating value from open data through the medium of having to decided to do exactly that and launch a business, put my own money into it, and now work full time in it. So all my chips are in this particular aspiration. And I'm going to show you where we're at. So I thought I'd relate it back to the ODI mission. So the Open Data Institute was co-founded in 2012 by Tim Berners-Lee, and what he wanted us to do was to show the value of open data, to advocate for the innovative use of open data, and to effect positive change across the globe. So in our own small way, well, not that small, the Data City is trying to do those three things. So I think we need to extract that out. It's a three-dimensional challenge. So the first is we have to show value. I think there are two ways. In the commercial world, will somebody give you money for it? Yeah, that's an absolute proof that someone values the thing you've done with open data. And having given you money, are they using it? So are they deriving whatever their definition of value is, which was the reason they chose to pay for it. Can you evidence the innovation? So are we doing something that was hard, or certainly hard to think of doing? And is it something no one else is doing? And can it drive positive global change? Yeah. So, sounds easy, doesn't it? Just got to find a problem that needs solving. In 2014, that problem presented itself to me. So TechNation did their first report, and that first report involved a view of the digital sector of the UK. The digital sector of the UK included lists of all the digital businesses in each city. My business was about the 4th or 5th largest digital agency in Leeds at the time, and we weren't in it. I went to the event, and Gerard came to Leeds, and I started unpicking what they'd done and read the method. And Paul and I met up and started thinking about what's going on here. What we uncovered was that basically the report was based on SIC codes, which is when you incorporate a company, you have to tick a little box that says what you do. I had ticked marketing and advertising, not ICT and computing. Back in 2014, ICT was digital and advertising was not. We were a digital advertising agency. So we weren't in it, and that was it. This struck me as being deeply flawed. So Paul and I went to the pub and did a bit of blue sky drinking, and came up with what is now the Data City. So as a marketing agency, we were doing a lot of web scraping for clients. So that was for marketing insights on price and range analysis and things like this. And we'd had some early AI products for bid management on advertising platforms. So by the time we'd had a few pints, we'd come up with a rough idea of how we might produce a better view of the digital sector of LEEDS, which would include my business. And that involved a mixture of the use of open data in the form of company's house data, and also scraping websites, which is another form of open data. It looks a bit like this. I'll briefly explain it. But essentially what we do is we start by taking the company's house database, which is an open data set you can call. We then have built a piece of IP which matches those businesses to their websites, which is actually quite hard. So my business was incorporated as Bloom Media UK Limited. My website address was bloomagency.co.uk. If you tried to do a match on the word Bloom, you get a lot of florists. You can then triangulate via registered address, but then we got bought, and my registered address moved to our PLC headquarters in Sheffield, but my trading address was in Leeds. So it all gets very complicated. So that's the first thing we solved. We've added a couple of other data sets, like we've got an innovation academic papers and research database, and we've also got events and meetups data. But primarily we're focused on organizations and adding context to that. And then what we built was a machine learning algorithm which enables you to say, rather than looking by key phrases for a sector, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show the machine examples of digital agencies, if you wanted a list of digital agencies. And what the machine learning classifier does is it reads those websites, understands the type of organization you're looking for, and then matches all the organizations in our database against that training set. Produces you a list which you can then help it learn what it's got right and wrong until you're happy, and then it provides a score for each organization. Everything above 0 is in the sector, and everything below 0 is out. So I'm going to show you that quickly. No. This is going to be tricky. Oh no. It's gone now. Where's the Chrome? displays. Yeah, right, okay. Can we see that? Yeah, right, that'll do. Right, okay, so it's pretty simple. Let's say I wanted to build, so there's no SRC code for cybersecurity. If you were interested in a subsection of cybersecurity like penetration testing businesses, that would be even harder. But so in this case, we can just look for, so ideally what you do is you research carefully 3 or 4 examples of the sector you're looking for, or you can just do this. So here we've got, these are all penetration testing companies. You can check their website. You can then add them to the classifier. You find another, you keep going until you've got this sort of green, this bar here says that you've got a good enough selection of companies, and then you hit go and it starts building the list. So when we first started, that took about 3 weeks to run the machine learning search. We've got over 500,000 companies in the database matched to website, got another 200,000 coming on soon. We'll soon be over 1 million. Takes a long time for the machine learning classifier to go through it initially. Over the last year, we've worked very hard on that. Got that down to about an hour, but don't worry, I'm not going to make you sit here for an hour while we build the list. So here is a penetration testing list I built. So you run it first time, you tell it what it's got right, what it's got wrong. You can see the classifier here, there are 33 companies which it's got right, have excluded, some it got wrong. You can ask it to tell you why it's done that. Here it's worked out that I'm looking for businesses that are focused on cyber, information security, penetration, cloud, testing, training, language. These are the sorts of words these businesses use to describe themselves on their websites. I've excluded, because what it did initially was matched a load of physical security companies. So I've excluded physical security companies, and we've got exclusions like dog and guard, construction and so on, and we can see how the classifiers learn what I mean by penetration testing sector. And then what you're left with is a list of businesses, and as you go through all of these are all penetration testing companies. And then going back to the thing we set out to do, which we built this because Leeds City Council were one of the first commissioners of the work, because it's important to cities and places to understand what's going on, and they're particularly interested in 2 things. Do we have innovative businesses in our city? And actually now we're working at a national level and internationally. So are we competing, nationally, internationally? Are our traditional sectors innovating? So the other thing we're able to show is that if you take a technology like artificial intelligence, it is both a sector of people who want to provide artificial intelligence as a service to businesses, and then it's also a transformative technology, a bit like digital was, and you start to see the words AI creeping up on all sorts of other sectors. So the legal sector 5 years ago wouldn't have been talking about using AI to deliver legal services, but we do see that increasingly in what's now being referred to as legal tech. And now you're actually starting to see legal firms advertising the fact that they use AI, legal tech, in their own service delivery to you as a buyer of their services. So people are paying for it. It was hard to do. We've won a number of grants and support. We were a Tech Nation Rising Stars semi-finalist, and we are starting, and our data is being used for things like Manchester use it for the local industrial strategy. The next Tech Nation report hopefully might use some of our data. We've got work going on with other government bodies to help understand the innovation sector of the UK, and then our ambition is to roll that approach out globally. And that's it. Okay.
Thanks, Alex. Okay, questions? Any questions? So who's got a question? We've got a microphone, so we've got a question over here, we've got a question at the back. Who are you, where are you from, and your question, please?
My name is John Sylvester. My question was really, how do you monetize that? Do you monetize that through a sort of API that organizations subscribe to?
Yeah, so that user interface is the one that the customer gets. So it's a SaaS platform, and it's an annual subscription. There is an API as well.
question at the back.
Hi, my name is John Bibby from York Bus Forum and the university. Your methodology is based upon the vocabulary used, the words you used,
It
as I
extracts
understand
the
it.
copy from the websites.
Yes, right. It rings bells of something I did about 10 years ago for a group at York in development economics, in which actually the vocabulary wasn't very good when there were dimensions, and we wanted to get the semantics of were they in favour or were they against, and I'm wondering how you get from the vocabulary to the semantics.
So my understanding of the answer to that is that because it's a machine learning classifier, it doesn't care. So you show examples of businesses that reflect the sector, whatever they've used to describe themselves, it will take as being right, and the result is as good as the training set you provide it. So if you give it an example of a legal tech company and they don't describe what they do on their website, you'll get rubbish back. It takes whatever they've used in their website, but it doesn't understand it as vocabulary, I don't think, in the way that you're describing it. It says, here is a load of text. It then spins out a load of clusters of things that it thinks it can group these things into, and then it ranks all the other websites according to them, and then it learns, because it's a machine learning process, we go and go, you got that one right, you got that one wrong, you got that one right, you got that one wrong, and it starts to build different clusters of positives and negatives, which it then tests so it's like a hypothesis, does this website match this website, yes or no? And it's a score. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, there's a question there.
Yeah, I were gonna say, so if you've got, let's say,
who are
100.
you?
Oh, sorry, Stephen Blackburn from Leeds City Council. I was going to say, if you've got, say, 100 people using this, and let's just say they're all searching for cyber security, and they're all going through that process of what counts and what doesn't count, are you collecting that information to make it easier for us to do the searching next time, or do we have to each individually go through the process each time?
So there are two things we're doing on that. So the first is we're in the middle of defining our own classification system. So we call them Arctic codes, and that's a real-time industry classification, where we're working with organisations. So we've got a conversation going with LSE, Oxford and Tech Nation on can we do a definitive view of what fintech is, for instance? Because you ask two people, no two people can agree, right? What's legal tech? There are about 15 to 18 sectors where we'll work with a really rigorous process of defining the training set. We will then classify all the businesses into those sectors, and then we will publish those classifications into the platform, so you don't have to build it yourself. You can just tick legal tech and it will give our answer. However, you'll be able to see the classifier, and if you want to create, like my example of penetration testing only version of cybersecurity, you could then remove the ones that you don't like and just focus on the other ones, or add other ones that you think broaden the sector out. So some people want to include a definition of legal tech which is just software providers. Some people want it to include consulting firms that consult legal tech into law firms. And that, who's to say who's right or wrong there? Those are just two different definitions, right? I hope that answers the question, yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Right, round of applause for Alex. Thank you. Who's next? So James is up next. We just need to do a little bit of a switcheroo on the old laptops. And before we start, so who understands the connection between HQ and ODI LEEDS? 2, 3 people. But, the people from ODI LEEDS, yes, I expect you to understand that. But yes, thank you. I'll explain. So ODI HQ set up in 2012. Tim Berners-Lee and Nigel Shadball talked to government, and they said it's a well-known story. Nigel, I think Tim is sat next to Gordon Brown. He says, "What's the biggest thing I could do for you?" And Tim says, "Set up the ODI." One of the only projects that were kept through into the coalition government. And the ODI was set up in just a bit after that, 2012. And one of the first things that the chief exec did was, okay, how can we make the ODI as impactful as possible? We should create a network around the world. And the concept of the nodes on a network, of course, was established. and ODI LEEDS became one of those nodes. So we are, in effect, a mini version of HQ based in Leeds. And the best way to think about it is a franchise of ODI HQ. So we can do all the things that they do, and ODI HQ very kindly gives us all of their brand and all of that stuff. And then we pay a small fee back to HQ for that and say thank you. So if there's any questions about that, you can. But hopefully my filling has worked
Perfectly.
Perfectly is a great word. Over to you, James.
Thank you. Good start. So, hi everyone. My name's James. I'm a consultant at the ODI. What is a consultant? It doesn't really mean anything really, but mainly I am involved in a lot of the research that we do, and I work with some of our both public sector and private sector clients as well. Here's my nice shiny slide. So one of the things that we're really focused on at the moment is about how to move private sector organizations from this idea of data sharing is bad, this is our data. We don't necessarily want to share data because we're worried that it contains information about our customers. We don't want to lose the faith of our clients or our customers, towards the open end of the spectrum, as Paul was saying, where they see the value of being as open as possible with data. We did a kind of study of open data companies in the UK in 2015, just looking at what the kind of state of open data use, open data publishing, and open data services was. At that time, and I'd expect this number to be much higher now, there were lots of good examples. You can see mostly clustered around London, but obviously up here around Leeds area as well. Lots of great stuff going on with open data. But the problem with this is that not enough companies kind of understand open data, see the value in open data, or the value in data sharing. And so we were really interested in kind of understanding what the companies that do share data or do publish open data see as the value for them as a business. And I just wanted to put this up in case people haven't seen this before. This is what we call the data spectrum. So what we try and do as an organization is bring people from the closed end of the spectrum, which is data that shouldn't be shared with other people necessarily, or isn't currently shared with people, towards this open end of the spectrum, which is trying to create as much value and engagement with people as possible. And what we realize, having been around for quite a while now, is that most of the people we work with and most of the people that we talk to sit in this shared space in the middle. So lots of them will share within a small network that they exist in, or they'll share for a specific purpose that they're kind of legally contracted for, but they don't necessarily see the value of sharing beyond those specific agreements. And there are a lot of fears around what they can and can't do with the data that sits in the middle, or whether they'll lose their commercial advantage by sharing data that sits in that shared space as well. Luckily, we're funded by UK government to work on a 3-year R&D program, which is coming to the end at the end of this month. But one of the things we were really interested in is, as I said, understanding why some private sector organizations see the value in sharing data and why some don't, and how we can kind of highlight what the value is for the organizations that are sharing data or are publishing open data at the moment. And that's just to give you an idea of the kind of stuff that we're interested in as part of the R&D program. So if anyone's interested, I can share the link to the R&D program, but all of the work that we do is published on our website. And the project, it's basically looking from the perspective of, I'm a business, what benefit is there to me and to my business for sharing data and using open or shared data? So what we did was basically work out who was sharing data, work out who was publishing open data by speaking to people on a network, by searching on the web, that classic research technique, and speaking to people. And we came up with a list of around 85 relatively strong examples of organizations that are currently either publishing open data or sharing open data or sharing data with other organizations across lots of different sectors. From that point, we kind of identified what the common themes were throughout those interactions and mapped out what we thought the value for these businesses might be. And then we spoke to some people in our network. So we have a kind of network of members and partners and clients that we work with often as well, who we kind of tested and verified these business values with. Then we thought, or kind of from speaking to these organizations, that the most valuable thing for them at the start of their journey would have been to know who else was doing it. And so we decided to produce some case studies based on conversations with organizations from different sectors based on the different business values. So these are the business values that kind of came out of this this project, this research that we did. This is a shorter list than we started off with, but unfortunately we couldn't find enough evidence for some of the ones that we initially wanted to include, and so we ended up with this list of 7. I have no doubts that there are more values for businesses out there from opening and sharing data, but these are the kind of really strong use cases that we saw come through. So we produced a case study for each section. I'm going to talk a little bit through the benchmarking and insights one, but I've only got 10 minutes, so I can't go through each one in detail. But we've got use cases from the shipping sector, the physical activity sector, the agriculture and nutrition sector, energy sector, manufacturing, open banking, which is the finance sector, and open innovation, which is a kind of different group of startups that came through our open innovation program, Data Pitch. That has come out awfully. Benchmarking. So this one was really looking at if organizations want the best insights about what's happening across their the market that they operate in, the organizations who they're potentially competing against, or the organizations that work in a very similar way to them, then you must increase access to data if you're not able to get insights about that stuff yourself. You must work with organizations who can provide you with those insights. So we spoke to an organization called Hilo Maritime Risk Management. They're a really interesting company that kind of sprung out of the Lloyd's Register Foundation and Lloyd's Register, which is the commercial arm of Lloyd's Register Foundation, who fund a lot of kind of engineering and shipping projects. They identified that there was a massive issue in the shipping sector with ships crashing into each other, which not only has a kind of big impact on those companies, those ships, but it also has an impact on the goods that they're supplying, has an impact on the environment, because a lot of the time it's non-renewable fuel, which spills into the sea or into the air, and it also has an impact on the kind of beneficiaries of that fuel. So, for example, if petrol's being transported across the sea and we run out of petrol because all the ships are crashing into each other, it's a very extreme example that wouldn't happen, but then we would all suffer because we wouldn't be able to use a lot of the transport that we use. So what Hilo offer as an organization is that they can predict some of the causes for ships crashing into each other based on some of the kind of routine safety data that ships are required to collect. So basically Hilo look at these things that they call leading indicators, which are kind of small things like small fuel leaks, which can then lead to larger risk factors. such as engine room fires, which then cause ships to crash or sink or etc. So Hilo analyze the data from a specific company. They compare it to data from other companies across the sector, and they're currently working with 50 companies. So they've got a relatively good kind of stock of data to compare each company against. And then from that kind of analysis, they can then provide safety recommendations about what the highest risk factors are for each company. And since they've started, this is just some kind of nice impact figures that have come out of that. So there's been a 72% reduction in lifeboat accidents across the companies that they've worked with, 65% fewer engine room fires, and 25% reduction in bunker spills. So basically fuel leaking into the sea. You can have a look at the rest of the case studies. They're online now. I put the link in there. I'm assuming the slides will be shared or publicly available afterwards. Unfortunately, we've written a report to go alongside it, but we've learnt from our engagement with some organisations that they don't believe it's genuine research unless there's a report sitting behind it. So we will publish that as well on our website. It'll be available for anyone to access, and that's pretty much it. So any questions from anyone?
Thank you. Any questions for James? I like the, yeah, you haven't done research unless there's some sort of report that nobody reads.
Yeah. Well, 5 people will read it, but those 5 people will be very pleased that we've written.
And nobody else will, yeah. Okay. Great, we've got a question over there.
Hi,
Where are you from and question, please?
Agri A project. What industries do you choose to do the research on, and did you do anything similar for construction?
So we kind of fell into the sectors rather than specifically starting off by looking at the sectors. Some of it came from our network. We have very strong links into the health space, into engineering, into energy, into transport. So naturally, some of the examples that we started to look at came out of that. We also do a lot of work with organisations in the private sector. A lot of our clients are also in those areas, particularly in health at the moment, and in transport. So that kind of influences who we reached out to initially, but yeah, that's kind of the answer to it really. When we look for work or when we look for organisations, we usually go via our network, and so sometimes it tends to be in the same sector because we know there's a strong presence of kind of data enthusiasts.
But is there, you mentioned construction there, do you think there's a definite requirement for construction to look at this, or some sort of?
Yeah, I think it's very useful for construction companies to kind of talk to each other and share practices from, let's say, from health and safety point of view.
Yeah.
So if you look at any coming from the private sector like Brighton, it's really difficult to find any information on or case studies on what they have been working on. And if something went wrong, for example, to kind of share that with everyone else.
Yeah.
The rest knows one or two wouldn't say not to repeat, but it's impossible to find.
Open data saves lives. Yeah, let's do it.
So that question about construction, we worked on a big kind of engineering landscaping project with Lloyd's Register Foundation, looking at the value of data sharing within the engineering space, and as part of that, they kind of consider construction to be a big part of that, and we're aware of construction being the major kind of health and safety kind of risk sector because it tends to have the most accidents of any kind of engineering focused sector. There are lots of conversations going on around this idea of, so as Paul was mentioning earlier, this idea of institutions for data. There are lots of conversations going on around how the big companies work together to create a data trust or a data institution where they all share data, there's specific governance around how that data can be used, and there's specific governance around who can access the data. But they're all quite early conversations, but it's kind of happening, I think, is the answer to that. So, I can't remember off the top of my head who's leading that. I think it's Robert McAlpine, the kind of lead organisation trying to push that forwards. But there'll be some information available online, and obviously I can share the links to the engineering work that we've done.
Fabulous. Another question here. Before we, is there another question about? No, sorry, I'm just making sure we get the microphones in the right place. Over to you.
It was just a quick, I suppose it's a little follow-up from what you've just sort of said. Google have been doing a lot of publishing in terms of their the search index around open data, and Amazon, AWS with regard to open data, data exchange, etc., where they're monetizing a lot of this. I think you've sort of touched on Amazon have got very, very specific terms of reference in terms of usage of that sort of data. I was just really what your thoughts are on the big players starting to enter this market.
So I can't necessarily speak from an ODI view on it, because I'm sure there'll be people in our policy team who will tell me that that they've got a slightly different view on it. I think that the conversation around kind of commoditizing data, so you pay me money and I'll let you have access to my data, we disagree with that, because I think that it's reasonable to ask someone to charge money if there's reasonable effort that goes into you providing access to someone, but if the infrastructure is already there, the access to the data should be for kind of a beneficial common cause, or as part of a contract potentially for a larger piece of work, rather than you just paying me for data because my data is valuable. We think of data very much as Paul said, as part of infrastructure, and so the value is not necessarily in the data itself, but what you do with the data, and therefore it's very hard to put a price on data, and there's a lot of complexities there.
Got another question at the back. Oh no, just one next. There's a question next to that one, and we can.
Hi, sorry, Frank Grignon.
So your name and where you're from?
Frank Grignon. So I just relocated in Leeds.
Okay, welcome.
From Asia in France.
Yeah.
Thank you. Do you have discussions with insurance? Typically, they have this cross-industry middleman with around fraud, around constructions, around health. So they're also very much organizing and sharing some data, anonymized. Do you have typically open discussion with them?
We have spoken to insurance companies in the past, particularly through that engineering project. I think what they've said to us, their main concern is the better access to data that they have, the better predictions they can make, or better kind of benchmarking of their kind of insurance costs and things like that, based on information that's available about the companies out there. They are also some insurance companies are willing to share data, although lots of them don't see the value in them sharing data. It's not really, we don't speak specifically to insurance companies, but sometimes they come up as part of the work that we do. But I wouldn't say that I've got some kind of great insight into their thinking around. Yeah.
I think that I'll just commit that it's fascinating what happens is, so 2 years ago the health sector really found open data, and they came and found us and HQ. Last year for ODI LEEDS, definitely the infrastructure sector found us. So Yorkshire Water, Northern Power Grid, Northern Gas Networks have all become sponsors of ODI LEEDS in the last 6 months, because they have identified data as being a massive asset within their organisation, and they've realised that as well as being owners of hard assets, that they're actually a data business, which and we all think that they probably should have known that before, but it seems like a bit of a realisation to them. Actually, crikey, we're a data business, and we better do something about it. They're also getting pushed by the regulators at the same time, but I think what you'll find is that the insurance, something will happen either regulatory or internally, and it'll all happen all at once in in that way. And then once, so it's a bit like the Matrix, you know, take the blue pill, and there's no going back. So I'm sure it'll happen very quickly. There's a question at the back.
John Bibby, York. Is there a fine line between the value of open data on the one hand and the value of secrecy on the other hand? Because a lot of companies value secrecy essentially because they don't want their competitors to learn their USP. Now, how do you counter that?
So I'd say we don't advocate for everything to be open. We advocate for organizations to think about ways that openness with data, so that could be open data or sharing data with other organizations, can benefit both them, other people. So for example, in the trust example, that's working with Syngenta. They're looking at publishing as much information as they can about their products and services and the interactions that they have with farmers, so that one, they can kind of increase trust amongst the farmers, because as a kind of agrochemical company, there's always tensions about whether they're trying to make money or whether they're actually trying to help. But also, because it's open data, their competitors can access that, but they don't necessarily see that as a bad thing, because they see themselves as a leader. They don't think that the information that they're publishing is going to compromise that. I can understand how potentially maybe a smaller company would see it that way, because they're trying to kind of emerge within a market and compete with the bigger players. But again, there are examples where smaller companies share data with each other in order to understand how they collectively can compete with bigger players. So I think like telecoms is a good example. There's a lot of kind of benchmarking stuff that goes on within telecoms to make sure that the companies can all kind of compete on a relatively level playing field. So yeah, I'd say we don't want everything to be open. If everything was open, then there'd be lots of issues around kind of ethical use of data, around kind of consent and things like that as well. But definitely there are areas that companies could explore which would benefit them and benefit others as well.
We talk a lot to company or organisations, you know, across the public and private sector. We say the biggest beneficiary of you publishing data is yourself. So I'm sure Syngenta's communication of all of their data has become so much more easier, because nobody has to ask for permission or ask a request. Could you send me that information? Is it published on the internet? They just have to search Google and they can find the data they need. And we have got lots of examples where businesses have found that actually we now are able to communicate effectively between ourselves without having to ask permission. And that is a massive benefit, that once people start to understand the way that they're sharing is, oh yeah, of course, that and a whole layer of bureaucracy and communication goes away, and they think very carefully about what data they're going to publish and also how much it's going to help them. So yeah, but it's an interesting conversation, and we always talk to people, say, so you haven't published anything, has anyone used that data in the last 5 years? And the answer is always no. Yeah. Okay. Is that it? Questions? Fantastic. Round of applause again. Thank you, James. Well done. Next up, we've got Eric from KPMG. We'll get you fired up. And then Jay is next. This is good timing. We can have a cup of tea or a drink. And
yeah, I would say help yourselves if you want to drink or whatever. Go and do it.
So Amy. There you go. So Eric can introduce himself while Amy gets it working, and over to you. Thanks very much.
That's great. And do I advance it here, or do I have a clicker? Nice. Okay. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? That's great. Okay. Appreciate the opportunity to come and join you all. My name is Eric Applewhite. I basically lead for public sector for government in the UK, data strategy and data governance. always appreciate an opportunity to come to the ODI. As you can imagine, I deal not so much with open data. I deal more in brackish ecosystems. If you ever kind of look at other places, I tend to work for clients that have much more non-open data, but are increasingly interested in the promise of truly open data, but at the same time, in a mixed metaphor, opening up their data. And at the highest levels really of leadership, I find confusion between opening up my data and open data and how we do that. I should tell you my perspective, and I'll try to take a few perspectives with you today and hopefully get something from me that you want to challenge back or that you're intrigued by. There are a number of things I think that make being in the world of data exciting. For those of you that have been in it for a while, I actually love that when I pick up the phone or meet somebody and say, do you want to talk about data, I get many more yeses than nos. That's changed quite significantly. So I think it's data's time, isn't it? And it's really important. Everybody in the room knows, data is I think, as important to steward as workforce or estates. And in many cases, when I talk to government or health clients, we talk about why are you investing in important assets that you hold in terms of your human capital, the physical spaces that you maintain, your IP, but you're not beginning to steward and curate this data asset that you have. I'm going to take the position that I think we're going to win the battle, and you might take the position that data is going to inevitably win because of how big it's becoming and what we're becoming. Is going to be won or lost, not because of technology, not because of process, but because of trust. And I personally think that most data initiatives and projects that I'm a part of are about trust. And we talk about a data change being about a trust brand, not a technology brand, and worry in particular about organizations that try to buy technology or just change process and then expect to be able to create a step change in data. So that's kind of where I lead. I always think it's important to create and sustain data conversations at a really human level. I like humor, I like compassion, I like lots of those things. And I find if we don't have those, very often we don't succeed in creating a real change in data leadership or data step change in an organization. So I'm a big fan of meeting words that we don't have in English, but I understand the concept right away. I like chiaroscuro. I don't know if there are any Italians in the room, but I'm probably butchering that. But that's just an Italian word for the interplay between light and darkness, where light meets darkness. And I always think that's a great word for the human condition, if I can say it that way. Zeitgeist is another one that's out there. Schadenfreude, probably mispronouncing that as well. I meet this one when I'm sat on the couch next to my wife and we're trying to decide whose turn it is to apologize, right? So I know this word very much. But I want to know what's happening really with the indigenous people of Tierra del Fuego. What do they have going on? Because I would have thought maybe this word would have been invented in a kind of smoky Parisian cafe between lovers, kind of will he, won't she, that kind of thing. But I actually think most of the organizations that I deal with when it comes to data, particularly brackish ecosystems where we're trying to talk about open and closed data together, if I can say it that way, are in this situation. They're looking across the table at one another. They want to begin, they know they need to begin, but they don't quite know how to begin. So this is the situation. So one of the things that I think you have to do, and I'm a believer, and you challenge me, increasingly a believer in this kind of just open it and good things will come, but the world that I live in isn't quite there yet. So I have to work on how do we sustain and start this conversation? How do we stop looking at one another and begin? So I'm gonna give you a few perspectives. One of the things you got to do is you've got to talk why, and most of you in the room will know why, but I'll share that anyway. And then the next is how. So at the very end, I might give you the thing you find most interesting, which is a kind of operating model or set of capabilities that don't have to deal with technology that I think help advance the human conversation about data. So that's coming at the end, just so that you don't get up and leave or anything like that. I thought I'd tell you, that's the payoff. And in addition to the 2 or 3 data jokes, those are the only ones that exist in the world, so I'm gonna tell you them all as the course of this presentation, right? Okay, so one of the things, and again, I won't go too deeply into these, but the first thing to tell you is there's austerity. We all understand austerity. I talk to health and care ecosystems and leaders that I work in, and one of the things we know is if we don't change, we're gonna run out of money to serve the very sick, and even we won't be able to serve the people that just need basic levels of care. We're all gonna be, if I can say it indelicately, sicker and deader if we don't solve the problem of austerity. And data and digital, I think, is one of the great promises where we actually have an ability to do that with delivering a similar or better level of service. And I should probably tell you that my definition of digital, if you care, is more of a supply chain one. So data is here. We have digital, which is a basically payload delivery mechanism to deliver outcomes. So that's my perspective when I'm talking to you. I love data, but I love data because it delivers outcomes that matter, and we need digital to deliver those outcomes, right? So here, what's happening in the world of digital and data? We're doing channel shift. It's all about devices. It's all about point in time. We're focusing more and more on outcomes and measuring value, right? So we need the ability to again, think about the value from data. And I think that's a discipline that's rising right now. And I'm trying to learn as much about how we value data as I can, because to me, it remains an intangible asset. But we have entire disciplines in audit and other places where what they do is value intangible assets. So I'm trying to figure out, or at least join the conversation on how we might do that. And then there's all of this collaboration, intersectoral collaboration. You know, people start as children, they become adults, they have children, and yet we have disparate agencies that try to serve them along the way. And a big problem in my world is we look at people like you and I in shards of broken glass instead of the whole mirror. And we're not going to win that way. So how do we begin to put that picture together? Increasingly, we're trying to collaborate between public and private sector. So I worked on a large, high-profile national program, which was all about how we collaborate in health to create new patient apps, Internet of Things, AI algorithms to improve patient outcomes. And one of my learnings there was some of those systems spent 12 months just trying to have the conversation together, as big companies, as digital disruptors, as universities, as health systems, trying to agree a contract and how they would share risk. They had 16 months to test their hypothesis. If they spent 12 months trying to agree how they would share risk, they had no opportunity really to achieve those outcomes. And that's a tragedy, I think, in terms of outcomes and in terms of data and how data could have been used for good. And then there's the pushing of data to where we all live locally, right? That's the other force that we're kind of feeling and seeing out there. And really the bottom line is we need tons and tons of data to achieve all these things. Economic value is another one. I was nervous to show this slide at the ODI because you will know this much better than I, but one piece of work I'm aware of was commissioned by Dubai. They obviously are governed differently and commissioned differently than perhaps some other places, but it was what's the value of data, and in particular open data, to our economy? Really interesting if this matters to anybody. And you do have to convince people, I think, that there is value out there to be gleaned. And you can see some big numbers here, right? You can see 1.8 billion USD by 2021, 2.8 billion, right? So that's a lot of Big Macs. I say that kind of jokingly, but that captures the attention of a certain type of stakeholder, and that's going to hold their attention, and that's going to make them bet on data. So that becomes important. I don't know Christian, but I was a big fan of meeting him on the internet, and I think he says probably the most important thing I've seen on the web in a while. And if you were trapped in an elevator with me for 5 minutes, and you might already feel like you're trapped in an elevator with me for 5 minutes, this is probably what I would tell you. There's this kind of paradoxical thinking that somehow we can do this kind of one ring to rule them all kind of mentality around data. Let's all get it in one system, and it's all going to be fine. My own personal view is you're never going to win that way. You have to think about joining up disparate silos of data and then being able to view them collectively for good, for outcomes. So I like this quite a lot. Just to cheat to the end, I think leadership and governance matter a lot in terms of fostering trust. So we almost always take the position, if you really want to disrupt on data, if you don't have one, you need a data leader or a function. You need to make data someone's job. If you make it a side of the desk exercise, or you give it to a CIO or a CTO, and they're maintaining infrastructure or what have you, it's not going to happen. And I think the announcement of data leadership culturally can be as impactful as anything that you achieve technically. So that's one thing. Another is I believe in this kind of use case, incremental, proving the data concept as you go as a way of fostering trust. I mean, to use another example, for me, trying to win the discourse and dialogue on data, data collaboration, data sharing, data partnership, if you think about what happens when anyone invades Russia, right? It's an indelicate analogy, right? But whether you're Napoleon or Hitler, what does history tell us? What does the Russians know? It's fine, this change can come now, but I'm gonna retreat and retreat and retreat and overanalyze and ask again and be unsure, and I can go all the way to Vladivostok if I want to. And what's gonna happen is the kind of leadership, the political will, the funding is gonna run out long before we can achieve change that will stick in terms of data collaboration. So for me, it's about designing systems that bring pace and trust together, that kind of defend against that, and that's easier said than done. Okay. What's one of the other things that's happening? I think, I have 2 young children. One of the interesting things I think about them is how different their world is than mine, and I think we're in the middle of something really profound in that we're splitting into physical and digital selves. Sometimes in how we're served, we have really interesting things happening. Like a few years ago, I think in the kind of American kind of category of conditions, they put internet gaming addiction as an example. Our world's changing all the time. We have an emoji movie, right? We can see culturally all around us how the world of data and technology is fundamentally changing us, but it's a bit like skiing and doing your taxes. We're in the middle of it now. How can we perfectly understand and strategize what's happening? Well, one of the things that I think is happening is this kind of digital self and this splintering, and we better, in terms of data, be prepared to deal with another person's digital self, but I think educate them about their digital self. And I'll talk a little bit about the responsibility, maybe of government and the interest that corporations might have in filling that role in a minute. That's Banksy. I don't know if you guys are fans of Banksy. That's his piece, Mobile Lovers. If you do Google Mobile Lovers, please put Banksy in, because I'm not responsible for the other hits that you might get. But what I love about this, and I have this picture in my office, is the first thing you think is two human beings that are really just so into each other. It's a great picture. But you look just a split second longer and you realize what they're really into, right? And it's one of the better demonstrations for me culturally of what's happening to us all in terms of digital and data. So I like that as a reminder. That's a force, I think, in data that we're going to have to deal with it. How we engage people about data, how we broker data for people is going to become increasingly important. We've had some of those themes today. So I'll continue on that theme. You may or may not accept this, but so my own personal view is that governments increasingly are interacting with us in two pieces. And if that's the case, then giving us insight into our digital selves becomes a fundamental thing that I think government needs to do, and perhaps corporations need to do. The jury is out for me on this important idea of who's going to be the kind of powerful information broker out there. Will it be government? Will it be big corporations that already hold our data? I don't know. I hope part of the answer is we will be part of that brokering process in terms of our digital selves, and I'll come on to that in a minute. Okay, so just as a thought exercise, you may or may not buy this, but in 10 years, it'll be as common for you and I, or 15 years, whatever time period, for you to check your data self in terms of data as it is for you to log into your online banking application. I do that once a day, probably, or close to once a day, and I actually believe that future's coming. You might challenge that. I'd love to talk to you about it, but I actually believe we're going to start to look at ourselves in terms of data and what people know about us, and what we're becoming will necessitate that we want to do that. I believe in the rise of data charities, data trusts, personal data stores, I think, or a force that's rising right now. Digital identity as a concept. Again, lots of nations and places are working on that as a concept. And I think what happens with digital identity is so interesting. It becomes not just about right of access. It becomes about putting the person at the center of their own data and beginning to control it and curate it themselves. So I think that's a force that's coming for the future. And as we think about this as a community of practice, whether we're open data practitioners or closed data practitioners or brackish data practitioners, this idea of where does the citizen fit? How do we help them? How do we engage them in terms of data, I think is arriving just about now, and it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. Another thing I would share with you, so one of the most, I think, important things that I typically do when I go in to run new data organizations is I look at the information governance function, and information governance is so important, right? It really is, because we can't break laws. Laws exist for reasons, and I'm a guy who almost accidentally sold my young son's entire genetic future to one of these who do you think you are firms, because I'm American. We all have stories about, who we're related to and this and that, and I thought one Christmas, wouldn't this be terrific? Because my wife always says, I'm English, I'm just English, I'm British. But then you think, well, you got the Vikings, when the Romans were here, you had the Belgians, whatever, so we thought this would be great. And I just happened to hit Google and realized that the FDA was having a pretty frank conversation with this organization about the fact that they weren't protecting the individual's rights to the genetic data that they had weighed in. So how terrible would it have been for a father to give away his entire genetic future? So I'm going to say a bunch of stuff, but first thing I want you to understand is how much I value information governance as long as it's proportional, okay, as long as it protects us. Nobody likes to be governed. I believe, although we have to be sometimes, I believe in advancing the data agenda. You flip the agenda, and I typically change my information governors to information coaches rather. Because if you think about it, coaches also govern, but they're responsible for orchestrating an outcome, aren't they? And they don't show up in the middle or halfway through or at the end and kind of introduce new things to do. They start at the beginning, they help find an information sharing path, they remain part of the dialogue, and then they stay to the end. And sometimes you win and lose, but I actually think, and this is entirely a leadership decision for organizations, it's got nothing to do with tech. If you flip the narrative and you create some information coaches and this culture in your organization, you're gonna begin to achieve a data culture shift that sticks. So something you might think about. Last and certainly not least, so again, my own opinions, not so much the opinions of KPMG, and it's a little bit of an eye test, but I don't know if any of you are fans of kind of Monty Python. I'm a huge fan of them. We're starting to lose them now. They have a great scene in one of their movies, The Holy Grail, which is a father talking to a son in kind of medieval times, and they live in a place called Swamp Castle. He's talking to his son, and part of what's funny about it is fathers and sons, like lots of fathers and sons, are really different men, right? Really different. So that's part of the humor. But he says, son, when I die, you're going to inherit Swamp Castle. And let me tell you how important it is. We built the first Swamp Castle. It sank into the swamp. We built the second Swamp Castle. That sank into the swamp. We built the third Swamp Castle. That one burned down, fell over, and then sank into the swamp. And we built the fourth one, and that one stood, right? So how many attempts did it take them to get to success, to get to value, whether that's economic or human? And one question I have in terms of data from that skid is, should we be in the business anymore of building swamp-proof castles? And I think, to an extent, we're going to be in that world for a while. What can we do instead to stop building castles in swamps, right? So what do we need to invest into the front of data? So for me, this is all the cool stuff I like to do as a technologist, right? This is all the BI, the analytics, the AI, whatever it might be. But I'm going to argue, unless you have leadership at the top and an information governance, coaching, stewardship capability at the front, and a technical governance capability where we introduce standards and common ways of exchanging data with one another, again, part of trust. But on that one, I don't know if you've ever tried to have a conversation with a non-technical stakeholder on schema, archetype, and pattern. I did that recently with a very senior stakeholder that I really needed to believe in that, and he literally listened for a while, turned around, said, it's quite warm, I'm gonna go inside, and he left, right? So I learned a powerful, but schema, archetype, and pattern, I'm a huge believer in. Program governance, you probably think, yeah, we all know what PMO is, we know what that is, but I actually think, for me, they should be at the front, because what I put is benefits realization and outcome modeling in that capability. And maybe an idea I would leave with you all, and I think this would be a-traditional. When you think about a data function, I'm gonna put a couple of a-traditional things in a data functioning capability, and one of them's outcome modeling and measurement. I think those are traditionally the purview of BAs and policy analysis analysts. They get supported by data, of course, but I think the most successful data sharing systems are gonna begin to create a data skill set where outcome modeling is at the core of what those individuals do at the beginning to estimate and at the end to prove. And then in the middle, and we've talked a little bit about this, how do you manage innovation? There's a kind of honeymoon excitement period when you create the data step change at first, and your first measure of success is you get more requests to do cool stuff with data than you can actually do, right? And if you're not careful, that can put you out of business because you get this expectation of hope that you can't possibly achieve. You get your limited runway back to the Russian winter again, you don't achieve, and then you're out of business. So you need a way of gathering all of the cool things you could do with data and then deciding in increments of 5 or 10 which things you do and in what order, right? And you do that based on the value you think it'll return, how technically difficult it is to do, maybe the public relations impact out there in the world. There are a number of factors you could use. That's hugely important. And then the last is stakeholder engagement. So in the world of open data, that becomes easier, but I still think there's a great deal of mistrust about sharing data, even open data, and what it might do. I have a few Israeli friends, and a really interesting thing about them is their expectation about how government uses their data versus most other places in the West is quite different. And I don't know if you know about the Israeli health system, but it's one of the highest performing health systems in the world. And they in terms of money spent for outcomes, and they use data very well, and data is at the core of what they do. However, the citizen expectation that they will use data in Israel for those outcomes already exists. And that's vastly different than the world we live in here in the UK or the United States or Canada or wherever it might be. So I think that's a fundamental difference. So I actually think communications as a core function of any data organization is going to help us win or lose the trust battle. I call it the rise of the liberal arts degree. So I want some of those communicators that are increasingly well educated about data to go out and tell the data stories to create the trust with evidence to keep sharing. So I would also put that kind of squarely in a data capability, okay? And I think, oh, that's my picture. My mom likes that slide, but not a lot of other people. So I'll stop there. Hopefully that was interesting, some things maybe to challenge or to think about, but that, as I say, trapped in an elevator with me is maybe what I've learned so far and what I'm thinking about now. So it's a pleasure to be here with you all, and I look forward to taking some questions now, if I can.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, thanks very much.
Thank you.
So I've got some questions, but if there's anyone else who's got a question, anyone in the room? I'm fascinated by the, you obviously get open data, but you work with people who don't get it. And do you think it's because they just haven't thought hard enough about it, or because they're scared of it, or because they just don't, it's just not in their view, or because we deal with it all the time, and we see the massive value we get out of being able to share and use data without having to get licenses or sharing agreements, and the massive cost that it puts into projects. Yeah. And usually it's data that, you know, we tell people a lot of the time that actually, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your data is not that many other people are that interested in it, you know, and, you know, just, you might need to get over yourself because you'll publish this and there won't be a big, there's not going to be a big volcano of interest in your data, but if you have a specific problem, it'll help. So yeah, just that question of
it's really interesting. I just think there's a mixture of terms too between this idea of opening data more broadly and what open data is.
Yeah.
I've met that a lot in the last year, and I wouldn't underestimate how the kind of important difference between those two gets conflated at the senior policy and executive level. So being able to communicate the difference as you go, I think, is key. I think in the open data world, most of the stakeholders I work with, as you say, are not from that world, so they almost can't believe it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They almost can't believe it. So I go back to data stories and giving examples of how opening up data delivers value. Now, I think the difference for me in the last 18 months, maybe longer, is they're waiting for you to tell them that story. They're leaning forward. Yeah. So there's a kind of desire and appetite to hear that, whereas before you had to work a little bit harder to make the case, I think, is the difference.
Yeah, okay, good. Any other questions or points? Right, thanks very much, Eric, that was amazing. Thank you. Last but not least.
Save the worst for last.
No. You can steal my microphone if you want.
Gets holding close enough to Right. Nice. Thank you. All right, awesome. So I only found out I was doing this talk like 48 hours ago, so please forgive the unoriginal title. I'm Jay. I work at a company called FutureGov. Does anyone know FutureGov? Yeah? Oh, awesome. Okay, not everyone though. So, we're a design-led change agency, we call ourselves. We've got offices in Sheffield and London. And in practice, what that means is people, often councils, come to us and they're like, give us a website, give us an app. And we're like, in response, what you actually need is a radically different organizational hierarchy that better serves the needs of your users. But a side effect of that is often that we need to invent these new 21st century tools that don't exist in that sector, and that's kind of what I'm going to talk about today for 10 minutes or so. So councils hold a lot of data about community services. This could be like GP surgeries, children and family centres, charities that provide support for elderly people, support groups for new parents, church fates, and like everything in between. They're swimming in the stuff. They hold this stuff for lots of reasons, so often to signpost residents when those people come to the council and need help, but perhaps their needs aren't quite severe enough for the council to be able to help directly, so they signpost them off to these charities that are more able and more suited to help in those situations. And the law says that councils have to do this kind of thing. They don't have a choice. They have to maintain these directories of services. But because councils are structured the way that they are, in silos, right, each team that does this sort of thing, indexing community services and signposting people to them, sits on top of its own little empire of data. And like here are just like 4 distinct data sets that we found in Buckinghamshire County Council, which is the council that I'm going to be talking about for this talk. The total number is probably like 2, 3, 4 times this. These are just the ones that we know about. So swimming in these little empires of data, which are all being updated separately on totally different pieces of software and maintained by separate teams, crucially. So the project that I'm going to talk to you about is ostensibly to redesign this website, which is the Buckinghamshire Family Information Service. But being us, we're looking for the more foundational problem, which in this case we think is a data problem. So we've been doing this kind of stuff with councils for a while now. So when we start a project in an area that we've worked in before, we tend to go in with hypotheses, which look like this. And then we'll quickly try with user research and usability testing and shadowing council staff and stuff like that to quickly try and prove them or disprove them. So this one talks about a lack of common data infrastructure in the council. There's an entire sector, actually, of well-established companies that provide councils with these big, beefy, monolithic apps to maintain these service directories that they have a statutory obligation to provide. And for the most part, they're a bit crap for reasons which I probably don't need to go into, and we can probably guess at. But if, let's say, the half dozen teams who maintain these various lists of services inside the council were maintaining one list, what would that look like? How much time and effort could we save? What if we didn't just have one list, but we published that list on the web as an API according to some kind of standard, so other people could use it? That's how TfL gave rise to CityMapper, right? And like a dozen similar examples by publishing their data in an open format that other people could understand. Well, that standard does sort of exist. This is the Open Referral Standard, which was developed for Washington, DC in America. It's a pretty good start, but there's a new standard which is being built at the moment, localized to the UK and our context here, the context of local councils. It's called, predictably, the Open Community Standard. Buckinghamshire have really been leading the charge on this. And this project that I'm talking about here is, I think, the first attempt to actually try and implement this standard on a real thing. So we've got to take a big spreadsheet with like 200 fields and 4,000 records or something odd like that and convert it to this standards compliant representation. So some of that is easy, some of it is harder. Like if we want to show people a service that's open now, like you'd expect from Google Maps, for instance, somehow we need to convert opening hours from like a free text box, because everything in the current data set is like big blobs of text. We need to convert that into some kind of standardized format that we can programmatically do interface magic with. Do we bite the bullet and do that manually for all of the thousands of records there are? Do we use some kind of fancy machine learning tool? Do we just ask the service maintainers, like the GP receptionists and the support group organisers, those people to update their records for us and just deal with it because it's a one-off? There's no easy answers for this sort of stuff, so we kind of have to go field by field and figure out what the best approach is. So we're making a totally decoupled front end that consumes this data. We're building in modern features to collaboratively maintain it with the public. So things like, is this out of date? Are these opening times accurate? Is this still where it claims it is? Is there a photo of this that you can upload? is this description accurate? Like we're coming up with design patterns to ask people these questions, just residents, people who might stumble across this. Whereas at the moment it's entirely on those teams inside the council to proactively go and try and update these things, which is a burden that often they just can't manage very well. But arguably more importantly, we're trying to build the right admin tools for this stuff for the first time, using the same kind of modern design standards as we use on the front end. So admin tools often look crap compared to the fancy user-facing stuff. We're trying desperately to fix that here. We're designing workflows to gently introduce council staff to not just being the masters of their own data set like they have been in the past, but get them used to collaborating with the public and introducing all sorts of like deduplicating design patterns so that we can start to figure out where the connections between data sets are and end up with one list at some point in the future. One big sticking point to getting this right is the Ofsted APIs, which a family information service needs to use to display Ofsted report data alongside services. So some people using these directories are looking for childcare, for instance, or schools for their kids. And it's really important to be able to show report data from Ofsted alongside those things. This is a legal requirement which we can't get around, and probably it isn't a good idea to try and get around. But the downside is Ofsted's APIs for doing this sort of stuff are very old, sadly. We don't think that they've been touched since about 2009. In the documentation, there's still references to DirectGov, awkwardly. But we're keen to try and find some way to democratize this stuff and maybe reduce the barriers to entry into doing this kind of stuff for other people. So it's actually quite hard to get permission from Ofsted to work on these APIs, which is a hurdle that we've gladly just gotten through. And we're not quite sure what to do with this new position. It could be as simple as making some kind of adapter that turns the difficult parts of dealing with this API into something a bit more modern, and then maybe we publish the code for that on GitHub or something. That's kind of what we're leaning towards, but we're not quite sure. If anyone's got a good idea, please tell me. It might be something totally different. And I guess the last point is that we're trying to bring the council with us on this journey. This is crucial to the way that we work. We want to make sure that they trust us to get this right. We don't want to sit in our offices in Sheffield and London and make this thing and then just drop it on them with an hour or two of training. We're co-designing this with them over the next few months through workshops, usability testing, show and tells, all that good stuff. And you can see on the left there an exercise in content design that we're doing with them and some shadowing on the right. And it's going okay so far. We're still in the first few sprints of this project, but there's been a big lead up. So I'm quite excited to see what we make. We're blogging about this, so that's our blog, FutureGov, and then the newly forged Buckinghamshire Digital Service have their own blog, where they'll probably be posting updates as well. So if this interests you, you can find out more there. If you've got ideas for the kind of stuff that we could be doing with this data that we haven't thought of, please tell me. I'd love to hear it. And that's it.
So, any questions? Question over there. Anyone else got a question? Can I ask one before we jump in? So, what you're talking about is radical new ways of doing things. How do selling new things to people who want to buy old things, how does that go?
Really tough. So I kind of alluded to it at the start, but a lot of our work is from people who just come to us saying, we would like an app, we would like this website, we would like you to rebuild our website. And it's always an upward hill conversation to say to people, we get that, and we're going to deliver that, we will give you what you've asked for, but also consider the structures of your organisation that mean that you've ended up into this position. And are you just going to be asking for the same thing in a few years because it's not actually done what you needed it to do? And co-design is really the best solution that we've been able to come up with to that. It's like taking people on the journey with us, training them to do user research and come out and speak to residents with us and figure out what's working and what isn't. Like, just show people. That seems to work best, we find.
Yeah, and then how do you respond to a tender where you try and show them and they actually want you to write it in a 100-word answer?
It's tough. I don't think anyone's cracked that problem.
So I think you're amongst friends, but we need to work out ways of breaking that somehow. Yeah. Question over there.
You work with big data sets from local councils. As we know, they're not very, maybe not accurate, but not very complete. So how do you work around that? For example, the offset reports, some of them have not been updated since 2017, as there's no need for some schools to be checked every so often. So how do you deal with the data that is not complete and is not in the same formats as such?
Yeah. So I don't think there's a magic bullet answer to that. It's just work. Hopefully, in designing the front end in a way that lets members of the public say when things aren't right, is the key that can unlock a better way of managing that, rather than having one team that's constantly got to be on top of this enormous data set, because that's just impossible. Even for a relatively large team, you're always going to miss stuff. But if you give the public easy ways to, on the front end, say when something isn't right, and you communicate to them where this data has come from, then that seems to be the way that we can start to solve that problem. But like whenever you're trying to maintain a data set at scale, I think that's just the cost of it. There's always going to be data that's out of date, and we've got to de-risk it, I suppose, as much as we can.
So there's bits of information missing. Do you communicate with the public that it's not up to date, or do you just
Yeah.
get them from the full picture?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a specific example. I think that if there was Ofsted data missing, we might not show that record, but I think it would depend on exactly what we're trying to show, whether it's childcare or a school or something. Or we would have to have some kind of very visible branding that explains why that's not there. We wouldn't just make it invisible like Google Maps might, for instance.
Hi, I'm James. I spoke earlier.
Hi, James.
How, as part of this, how do you bring, or do you bring, kind of leadership people within local authorities on this journey?
Yeah. Again, I don't think there's a magic bullet answer. The show and tell works quite well for us, and we tend to try and, so we always start off trying to get everyone to come to the show and tell, which often doesn't work out very well. So we are not averse to putting extra work in just to make the engagement happen. For us, a project like this, the engagement is probably the majority of the work. To be honest, a lot of the user research that we do is actually sort of secretly an engagement exercise rather than finding out things for the first time, because we've got pretty good instincts, because we've done a lot of stuff like this now. So it's whatever way that we can find that fits within their existing structure to show them the benefit of what we're doing, that's what we do.
And do you see, kind of post-project, do you tend to see organisational change that sticks, or?
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the project. If we get asked to make a website, which is it's a minority, but it's still some of the work that we do, then it's obviously a lot harder to make lasting organisational change, because they just weren't prepared for it when we came in. But more often now, we are getting asked to do these bigger pieces of work where people are saying, redesign us. Don't just redesign the website, like tell us how we need to structure ourselves for the 21st century in order to make the most of these new technologies, make things better and make them cheaper. Because I think people are starting to catch on to the fact that just having a fancy website isn't going to solve those deeper structural problems that lots of councils are contending with.
Is that it? Okay, thanks very much. Thanks very much. Round of applause. And then give yourselves a round of applause. Thanks very much for coming. This is the members' meetup with ODI HQ. Hopefully we're going to do some more of these. I think we're going to do them in the future. We've got a couple of announcements to do, so watch the space for the next members' meetup. Whenever we do, we'll think of a subject. If anyone wants, or there's something passionate they want to talk about, let us know, and we will build something for you. We are about to announce all of our LEEDS Digital Festival stuff on Friday. Is that right, Amy? It's all going to go live. We've got Planet Data. We've got Open Data Saves Lives. We've got, what else have we got? I'm forgetting now. We've got Planet Data, Open Data Saves Lives, Diversity Data. And this is a test, isn't it? My God. I've got an excuse because I'm old, but come on, Amy. Yes, the Internet Things Showcase that we're going to do. There's 4 things, but we've got a whole bunch of other stuff. So Child Friendly LEEDS are doing their stuff here, and we've got 3 or 4 other people who are booked in. So we'll be sharing all that on Friday, and that's it. Any questions for me before we finish? Okay, would anyone like a cup of tea? Would anyone like a coffee, beer, snacks, wine? Thanks very much. Cheers.